The Blackwater Swamp has always been a strange place. Mist creeps across the water like invisible fingers, and it's never completely quiet. Even without wind, the trees creak. Even without people, you always feel like you're being watched. My name is Ethan, and I'm an investigative reporter. I went to Blackwater to report on the disappearance of the Lamort Circus, a traveling troupe that mysteriously vanished in 1923. There was no fire, no attack. The performers, the animals, the tents, everything disappeared without explanation. The only thing left was a trail of footprints that ended in the middle of nowhere, and from time to time, some locals claimed to see the circus lights shining into the swamp. I decided to find out the truth. I arrived at the swamp as night fell. The humidity clung to my skin, and the air smelled of old mud and rotting leaves. With a flashlight in one hand and a camera in the other, I followed a barely visible path through the twisted trees. The locals had warned me, if you hear laughter, run. I thought it was an exaggeration, until I heard it, faint, distant, but real. I kept walking. With each step, the sound grew louder. First laughter, then the tinkling of bells. Then, in the middle of the fog, I saw it, a red and gold arch, old and faded, with the words written in worn letters, Circus Lamort, the show never ends. My heart raced. This was not possible. The circus was there. The colorful tents rose in the middle of the swamp, glowing in an impossible yellow light. The rusty Ferris wheel turned slowly. The sound of drums echoed in the air, but there was no one there, or at least that's what I thought. Because when I blinked, the lights came on at the same time, and the entrance to the main tent opened by itself. The entrance to the main tent swung open by itself. My blood ran cold. The wind howled through the trees, but inside everything was quiet. No voices, no movement, only the warm glow of dim lights illuminating the interior of the canvas. The warning from the locals echoed in my mind. If you hear laughter, run. But I had already heard it, and now I couldn't leave. I took a hesitant step into the tent. The smell of old straw and rust was strong. The stands were empty, covered in a thin layer of dust. In the center, the round ring looked intact, as if time had not touched the place. Then I heard a sound, the sound of applause, coming from nowhere. My eyes darted around the empty stands. The sound continued, rhythmic clapping, an invisible audience clapping for a show that didn't exist. My throat went dry. That was when the curtain at the back of the ring opened, and someone came out. A clown, tall, thin, wearing a worn black and white suit. His face was painted white, with a red smile stretching beyond his lips, but his eyes were completely black. He looked at me and bowed slowly. The show never ends. The voice didn't come from his mouth. It came from the empty stands. I felt my body freeze. Something was wrong with this place. The clown took a step forward, and then all the lights went out at once. The circus disappeared into darkness, and for a moment, everything was silent, until I felt it, something behind me. The back of my neck prickled. A cold whisper whispered against my ear, "You're part of the show now." I tried to run. My legs wouldn't obey. The invisible applause came again, louder, frenetic, and then the lights flickered again. But now the stands were no longer empty. They were full. Hundreds of figures sat in the darkness. No faces, no eyes, just shadows applauding nonstop. My body shook. I had to get out of there. I turned to run, but the clown was already in front of me. He smiled wider. His empty eyes stared at me. The show never ends. The darkness swallowed me. The next morning, the residents of Blackwater saw something strange in the middle of the swamp. An old poster hanging from a twisted tree. On it was a blurred image of a terrified man in the ring, and at the bottom, red-stained letters formed a single sentence, "New artist coming soon." The Hollow Circus closed 20 years ago. The authorities claim it was due to financial problems, but the locals know the truth. A boy disappeared on the last night of the show. There were no traces, no evidence of escape or kidnapping. Only one thing was found inside the main tent the next morning, a bloody clown nose in the middle of the ring. Since then, no one has dared to enter there. But I am not like the others. I am curious, and that night, I decided to enter. Crossing the ruins of the circus was easier than I imagined. The boards that surrounded the grounds were broken, rotting with time. The icy wind blew hard, shaking the remains of red and gold canvas. The silence there was not normal. It was a silence that watched. The big tent of the ring was still standing, torn, tilted, but strangely intact. I took a deep breath and stepped through the entrance. The air inside was heavier. It smelled of dust, rotting wood, and something sweet. The bleachers were covered in thick dust, but there was something strange about them. I blinked. There were marks, like someone had sat there recently. My chest tightened. This didn't make sense, but before I could process it, I heard a sound, a rustle of fabric. I turned the flashlight toward the center of the ring. My heart stopped. Sitting there, with his back to me, was a clown. His blue and white outfit was faded. His collar was dirty. His head tilted slightly to the side. He wasn't moving, but I felt like he knew I was there. I swallowed hard. "Hello?" My voice echoed through the empty tent. The clown didn't respond. I took a step back. That's when he turned his head to me and smiled. The clown smiled. My body froze. His sunken black eyes were empty, as if there were no soul inside them. His cracked, dry lips curved in a smile that seemed impossible for a human face. The silence in the tent grew heavier. Then, he moved. Slowly, he stood up. His dirty, faded clothes rustled, as if the fabric was stuck to his body. His movements were awkward, as if he didn't know how to walk properly. My heart hammered inside my chest. I wanted to run, but my legs were rooted to the spot. The clown took a step forward. I took a step back. He laughed, low, slurred. The flashlight trembled in my hand. The light wavered, casting strange shadows across the empty stands. Then, he was gone. My breath caught. I looked around, trying to find any sign of him. The tent was empty, but something was wrong. I felt a chill on the back of my neck. Someone was behind me. I turned slowly. Nothing. Then I saw the dressing room mirror at the back of the tent, and my reflection was not alone. The clown was behind me. His deep black eyes reflected in the glass seemed to laugh at my confusion. My chest tightened. This couldn't be real, but then he began to move, slowly, from within the reflection, and he stepped out of the mirror. My flashlight went out. Darkness filled the tent. The only sound was his breathing, weak, wet. Then I felt it, ice fingers landing on my shoulder. My entire body went paralyzed, and his voice whispered in my ear, "Now there's room for one more in the show." A low laugh echoed through the tent. The darkness pulled me in. The next morning, some curious people passed by the old circus. The tent was still there, forgotten in time, but something was different. Now, there were two silhouettes sitting in the ring, two clowns, and at night, if you listened carefully, you could hear two laughs echoing in the wind. The Blackmore Circus doesn't exist. At least that's what they say. There's no record of it in any newspaper, no advertisement, no photo. But every now and then, someone finds a mysterious note lying on the ground, on a park bench, or stuck in a doorway. And those who do find it disappear. I never believed these stories until I found a note. It was a cold night in St. Louis. I was walking home from work late, taking a shortcut down a deserted street, when I saw something strange, a piece of paper floating in the air. It didn't fall slowly, like a normal piece of paper. It seemed to move on its own. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. The note slid to my feet. I bent down and picked it up. It was old, yellowed, with faded red letters. Blackmore Circus, a show like no other, admission only, midnight. I turned the note over. No address, no date, just a strange hand-drawn symbol, an eye inside a triangle. I frowned. Probably a prank. But even so, I felt a shiver. Something inside me told me to throw it away, but I didn't. And at midnight, the note began to glow. I woke up to a noise. I was lying in bed, but something felt wrong. I looked at the nightstand. The note was there, glowing a faint reddish hue. My stomach churned. This didn't make sense. I picked up the paper. It was warm. Then I heard laughter, software distant, but coming from outside. I got up and went to the window. My street looked different. Where before there had been dark buildings and empty sidewalks, now there were lights, colorful tents, a slowly spinning Ferris wheel, a lit-up ticket booth. My heart raced. That hadn't been there before. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. In the glow of the lights, I saw someone standing at the entrance to the main tent. Tall, thin, wearing a dark red suit and a wide-brimmed hat. He wasn't moving, but I knew he was looking right at me. My throat went dry. I had to get out of there. But when I turned to gather my things, the ticket was gone, and behind me, in the mirror, the man in the red suit was smiling. The man in the red suit stood in my mirror, smiling. My skin crawled. My entire body screamed at me not to move, but I couldn't look away. His mouth was too big. His teeth were sharp and yellow. His eyes were black as glass. Then he raised a hand and knocked on the glass. Knock, knock, knock. My reflection didn't move, but he did. My chest tightened. This wasn't possible. And then the glass began to crack. First a thin line, then several, spreading like roots. The reflection flickered, and when I looked again, I wasn't in my room anymore. The smell of rotten cotton candy and rust filled my nostrils. Dust billowed into the air. The dirt floor creaked beneath my feet. I was inside the circus. The colorful tents rose up around me, lit by old lanterns. The Ferris wheel spun slowly, its cabin swaying as if it were full. But I was alone. The silence was not normal. It was heavy, as if something was there, watching me. Suddenly, the lights in the main tent came on. The entrance opened with a snap, and a deep voice echoed through the air. The show is about to begin. My legs trembled as I walked through the tent's entrance. The ring was huge, covered in dark sawdust. The stands were full, but not with people. They were mannequins, hundreds of them, sitting still, with blank expressions. Some had smiling mouths, others seemed to be screaming. Fear burned inside me. What the hell was that? Then I heard the applause, low at first, then louder. The mannequins clapped. Panic gripped me. I had to get out of there. But then, the curtains of the ring parted, and he appeared, the man in the red suit. He walked to the center of the ring, his shoes gleaming in the dim light. The smile never left his face. "Welcome to Blackmoor Circus," he said, spreading his arms. "You've accepted the invitation. You're now part of the show." The applause grew louder, and then the stands began to move. The mannequins stood up. My muscles locked. They were coming toward me. "I don't want this," I screamed. "I never accepted." The man laughed. "But you took the ticket." My legs finally responded. I ran for the exit. But when I reached the door, there were only more stands. There was no way out of the circus. I felt cold hands touch my shoulders. The mannequins were all around me. "Help us," a voice whispered. I looked to the side and saw something that made me stifle a scream. The mannequins had human faces, the faces of missing people, people who had found the ticket, people who had never left. The darkness pulled me in. The last sound I heard was applause, and the last thing I saw was the man in the red suit, smiling. The show never ends. The next morning, a man was walking through St. Louis when he saw a piece of paper floating on the sidewalk. He picked it up. It was a yellowed ticket. Blackmoor Circus, a show like no other. Admission only, midnight. He smiled, thinking it was a joke. He folded the note and put it in his pocket. And that night, at midnight, the circus appeared again. I should never have gone back to that park. When I was a kid, Lone Star Fun Park was my favorite place. The bright lights, the colorful rides, the smell of popcorn and cotton candy. But one night, everything changed. A child disappeared there, and no one ever found her. The park closed shortly after, abandoned in a hurry, as if everyone wanted to forget. But I never forgot, and that night, I decided to go back. The rusty fence creaked as I walked through a gap in the fence. The park was rotting, eaten away by time. The smell of rust and old wood filled the air. The rides were covered in moss, some toppled over, others rotting silently. But the Ferris wheel was still there, tall, rusty, leaning to one side, but intact. And then it moved. My lungs seized. The Ferris wheel spun a little, just enough to rock one of the cabins. The wind? Maybe. But there was no wind. The night was dead. I clutched the flashlight in my hand. I needed to get a closer look. I walked past the wrecked rides, past bumper cars sunk into the ground, and eyeless carousel horses. With each step, the air felt heavier. I reached the base of the Ferris wheel. The ladder to the top was still there. I looked up. The empty cabin swayed gently, and then I heard it. A laugh, low, childish. A chill ran down my spine. The laugh came from above, from inside the Ferris wheel. My fingers went numb. I swallowed hard. I looked again. The empty cabins seemed darker now, and that was when I saw it. A small white hand gripped the iron of the highest booth, still, not moving, too small to be an adult's. The air froze around me, and the laughter grew louder. The laughter grew louder. My feet froze on the ground. That little white hand was still there, gripping the iron of the highest cabin, too small to be an adult's. The Ferris wheel creaked, its old metal creaking as if someone was moving up there. My body told me to run, but my eyes were fixed there. Then the hand disappeared. Silence fell over the park, and in the next instant, the lights of the Ferris wheel came on. My heart almost stopped. The bulbs, which shouldn't have worked for decades, shone with a dull yellow light. The wheel began to turn, alone, no wind, no electricity. My lungs burned. This was not possible. Then I saw it. In the third cabin from the top, a childlike silhouette, small, thin, sitting still, with its head tilted slightly to the side. His feet dangled in the air. Fear tightened my throat. The missing child. Was it possible? I took a step forward, trying to get a better look. The figure moved, and then his eyes glowed in the darkness. My muscles locked. The wheel kept turning, slow, steady. With each turn, the silhouette seemed closer. The laughter returned. But now, it came from behind me. My blood ran cold. I swung the flashlight, sweeping the darkness. Nothing. But I felt it. Something was there. The laughter turned to whispers, unintelligible words, children's voices murmuring around me. The flashlight flickered, and for an instant, I saw it. Children, pale, small, with dark, sunken eyes, all around me. Their laughter echoed like a buzzing in my head. The Ferris wheel spun faster. The cabins shook violently. A cold hand grabbed my wrist. I jumped back, trying to free myself. But there was no one there. The whispers grew louder. "Play with us." The whispered phrase repeated itself, merging with the noise of the dead park. And then, the wheel stopped. My gaze slowly rose. The highest cabin was empty. The child was no longer there. The laughter echoed again, this time right next to me. A shiver ran down my spine. My body wanted to run, but my eyes turned on their own. And then, I saw her. A little girl, dirty dress, hair stuck to her pale face, bare feet. Her smile was wrong. Her mouth was open too wide. Her eyes were black. She held my hand. The cold, thin fingers pressed against my skin. "Now it's your turn." The Ferris wheel began to spin again, but now I was inside it. The next morning, the few curious people who still passed by the abandoned park noticed something different. The Ferris wheel was no longer motionless. It was spinning slowly, as if someone were inside one of the cabins. And if you got close enough, They say you could hear children's laughter, and among them, a new laugh. It all started with a whisper at the bar. I was in Las Vegas, drinking alone, when a man in a wrinkled suit sat down next to me and whispered, "Have you heard of the underground circus?" I frowned. Circus? Underneath the city? I thought he was joking, but the way he was looking at me, it wasn't a joke. "There's no ticket, there's no address," he continued, his eyes wide. "If the circus wants you, it'll find you." I laughed, but that very night, it found me. I left the bar around 2 in the morning. The strip was crowded, bright, alive, but the moment I turned down a side street, the world went silent. I looked around, no cars, no music, no voices, like I'd left the city without realizing it. Then I saw something on the ground, a black note folded in half. My heart raced. There was no one around. I took the paper with trembling hands and opened it. 3 words were written in gold: "Come down." It was then that I noticed an open manhole cover just in front of me. A ladder led down into a dark hole, cold, silent. I took a step back. This had to be a prank, but before I could turn around, a song began to play, low, strange, a distorted waltz coming from the darkness. The note in my hand grew warm. Then I heard laughter, low, far away, coming from beneath the city. My breath caught. I should leave, but my feet were already on the ladder, down, into the circus. The staircase seemed endless. The smell of damp earth and rust filled the air. The waltz continued to play, but now it sounded clearer, as if an invisible orchestra was waiting for me down there. My chest tightened with each step. Something was pulling me deeper. And then I arrived. The tunnel opened into an immense space, an underground circus. The ceiling was a dark dome, studded with tiny lights that looked like stars. The red and gold canvas stretched around it, closing off that secret world. There were bleachers, packed full, but the people didn't move. I froze. Their faces were frozen in bizarre expressions of joy. Some were smiling too wide, others were wide-eyed. No one blinked. No one breathed. A shiver ran down my spine. What the hell was that? The music stopped, and a deep voice echoed in the ring. "Ladies and gentlemen, the show is about to begin." I turned around. A tall man, dressed in a shiny black suit and top hat, appeared in the center of the ring. His eyes were too deep, too dark. "Today we have a special surprise." He spread his arms wide. "Our guest of honor has finally arrived." The blood ran cold in my veins. He was talking about me. The motionless audience applauded, but the sounds of their clapping didn't match the movements of their hands. Bile rose in my throat. I had to get out of there. I spun on my heels, looking for an exit. The bleachers were closer now. Number that wasn't possible. I took a step back. The frozen crowd turned their heads in unison. The sound of bones cracking filled the air. The master of ceremonies smiled. "Now, let the show continue." The lights flickered, and the next moment, I was in the middle of the ring. The crowd stared at me, waiting. The darkness swallowed me. The next morning, a city worker found a folded black note on the ground near an open manhole cover. He picked it up and read the 3 golden words, "Come down." That night, the underground circus opened its doors again, and a new show began.